welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Crimson Cast. Galen and Clavio here with you stateside. Scott Caulfield coming to you from an island location as we celebrate another win for the Indiana Hoosiers as they knock off the Michigan State Spartans in pretty standard style. Standard at least for this season, certainly not standard for the history of the Indiana-Michigan State series, which we'll talk about in a second. But a clinical victory for Indiana yesterday. They knock off Michigan State 38-13. We're going to talk all about it. Scott, happy win, happy homecoming. How are you doing right now?
I'm doing great. We are getting ready for Crimson Cast timeshares out here in the Caribbean. So we'll start selling those soon. No, I'm traveling. I'm in a fun location, but no, it is, it's great. Indiana, like really, that was a very business-like win. I know we're going to get to recite the drives, but it's just like touchdown. It's just like they took care of business. And as I mentioned my buddy Robert, who's a Michigan State grad. We're traveling together with family, so he's here with me as well, and we're watching the game. And like halfway through the second half, he's like, "Man, I thought your defense was good." And I'm like, "We've given up 10 points." It's like because they were moving the ball here and there. And we definitely, I would say that one of our weak points is a mobile quarterback, but I think that's always a weird thing for teams to deal with is mobile quarterbacks. But no, overall, what are you complaining about with a 38-13 win on homecoming against a team that literally 18 months ago was like we were aspiring to be at that level of the Big Ten?
Yeah, and a team that has historically dominated Indiana in the Old Brass Spittoon series. This was only Indiana's 20th win ever for the Old Brass Spittoon.
Seriously?
Yeah. So
because we won last year, so it was 18 going in. Wow.
Yeah, it was one of those things one of those series that there's always been a team that's had the upper hand, and it's now Indiana in this position is fascinating. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about what's going on at the FPI level. Scott's got a little bit of an outer limit on time, so he may be around for that. He may not, but it's fine. So a lot to talk about on this show as we reset Indiana for this upcoming week. First, just a reminder, we're brought to you by Homefield Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions, the softest fabrics, the coolest designs. Another great week for Homefield Apparel in terms of just seeing people out with it at the games. Of course, here in Bloomington, you can go to the new Homefield at Tracks location. We should be there later this week for a live show as we get ready for Indiana taking on UCLA this upcoming week. Head over to homefieldapparel.com, use the code HOME23 and get 15% off your first order. All right, Scott, let's dive into things here. Indiana comes into this game off of the biggest road win in program history, arguably, as they win by 10 points at Oregon. If you were an intelligent person who understands football, or if you were a very scarred, lifelong IU football fan, you came into this game nervous about a slow start, about not playing to the level that you played last week or that the team played last week. And it felt that way kind of in the first half, in as much as Michigan State had a really good game plan on offense. And you could tell that what they had built their approach on was eating up as much time as possible on every drive, not really taking a lot of deep shots, but instead just kind of moving the ball up the field, looking for soft spots in the zone, and relying on their offensive line to give Aiden Childs enough time to operate in the pocket. And it was fascinating being in the stadium and looking up at the clock. And, after Michigan State scores that touchdown to go up 10-7, it's like, man, Michigan State's had the ball for like 15 minutes and Indiana's had the ball for 5. And, you got the sense that, this could be a real problem for Indiana if they don't snap out of it. But they did snap out of it. And from that point forward, Indiana ended up dominating the game. They only allowed 3 points the entire rest of the way. And even that last 3 points was clearly two coaches like saying F you to each other on alternating possessions at the tail end of the game. Scott, as you were watching this, were you worried in that first half about Indiana and what was going on the field?
And it was also kind of an F you to the people who bet the point spread as well. like to Vegas. That's one of those moments I love. That going to Vegas is not as much fun now because you can gamble on sports anywhere. But that's one of those moments where it's like the game is over, nobody cares. But if you're in Vegas watching that, like people are going nuts on that field goal, like screaming and yelling. And that was anyway. I was slightly nervous in that. We saw it with Old Dominion, with Childs having a running Childs for Michigan State being a running quarterback, like it causes some issues because you would see like the pocket break down. It's like, oh, this is where we normally get the sack against Iowa or Oregon or Illinois. And then Childs would kind of just, dart out. And it's like, we'd still have great coverage, but it's like he'd still pick up 2, 3, 4 yards. And that's what it's kind of, or he'd find a little dump off pass or something. And that's what allowed them to keep moving the ball. I would be nervous until we either stop them or it's like we come back on offense and then just clinically tear them up on defense. I mean, our offense it's like, oh, there's Omar Cooper Jr. open for 48 yards. Like, oh, Surratt's open. Like, oh, Hemby's just going to like, I was not concerned in the least that we'd be able to score touchdowns. So to be fair, like I hate again, as an IU fan, it's like I'm shedding all of these pieces. Like it's really hard to be like, oh, I was just never totally concerned, but I wasn't really concerned. But there was a part of me just being like exactly what you said. Is Michigan State's game plan going to cause some problems here? Because like again, if you look at the like if I told you, Galen, the first time that our offense doesn't score a touchdown would be the end of the third quarter, and we score a touchdown on every play, you'd be like, oh, we're going to kick the hell out of Michigan State. And it's like, oh, but at one point we'll be down 10-7 in the middle of the second quarter. It's like, these things don't make sense. Yeah. I mean, it was concerning. And it's like one of those things where, our defense, on one hand, it's like they've got to be able to get a team like that off the field. On the flip side, it's like you gave up 13 points. Like that's more than enough to win. And like not every series can be a 3-and-out for your defense.
It was one of those things where, again, I really felt like Michigan State had a good game plan. They also have some really skilled players at the skill position levels. Like Aiden Childs, it was a top level and highly sought after recruit for a reason. Nick Marsh is awesome. The idea that you're just going to suppress scoring and movement of the ball
for everybody all the time
is essentially not something that you can count on. I'll note though that Indiana defensively was not as good in pass rushing. They finally started to get to Childs. I mean, that sack at the very end of the first half, I think was the indicator like, okay, we got our mojo back on this. Yeah. And even the way the ball was being moved, it was hard to get mad at it in terms of like it was frustrating watching the number of passes. A lot of them were into the soft like creases of the zone or into the flat. They used a lot of Indiana's going to rush the quarterback from the outside. They're going to send a blitz or whatever. That clears out that side. Michigan State was ready to exploit that. And that worked, but it worked only in a limited sense. And it really relied on two things. A, it relied on their offense scoring on every possession, which they did not do. And it also relied on their defense being able to keep Indiana from scoring on every possession, which, again, it did not do. And the way that Indiana was able at the end of the first half to essentially remove the doubt from what the outcome of the game was going to be and then come right back out and score at the beginning of the third quarter, you'll hear on Bite Size Bison or you'll read on Bite Size Bison that whole idea of, the middle eight. The last 4 minutes of the first half, the first 4 minutes of the second half. This was one of those textbook types of games where what Indiana was able to do in those circumstances made a huge difference because it wasn't just the offensive performance, scoring inside 2 minutes and then, at the end of the first half and then scoring at the beginning of the second half, but it was also the fact that Michigan State, with a minute left to go, couldn't go down the field and score. So now you've gone plus 14, but you've actually gone plus 21 or plus 17, however you want to do it. And that pivoted the game completely. I think I even heard Curt Cignetti talk about that a little bit in his post-game interview. So it's one of those things where this is what a professional team does. And I couldn't help a professional, you know what I mean?
Right.
What I mean by that is essentially
a well-run college program.
Yes. I was thinking about this last night. I've seen this game so many times where Indiana is playing the role of Michigan State. where you come out with a good game plan and you stay close for about a quarter and a half, close to the halftime, and then the other team, goes on an 80-yard drive at the end of the half, scores a touchdown. You don't score at the end of the half on your possession. Then they score again. I can't count how many games it feels like, Scott, we've seen Indiana lose doing this. It feels like Invasion of the Body Snatchers watching Indiana do it to another team. It's going to take me a couple of years to get used to this.
It's also cool seeing another team come in with the game plan that's a good game plan that we can adjust to and change to. But I mean, in the end, I think you hit on it. Like that was the trouble with this idea for Michigan State is if you're going to shorten the game and limit the number of possessions, then if you're Michigan State, you have to convert on basically every one of those possessions. And yeah, they started off with a field goal and a touchdown. It's like that's when the game was tight. The very first time, the third possession, they don't have any points. It's like that's when the game starts getting blown open. And that's because, again, we keep saying this, it's kind of a refrain as you and I learn to become better fans of a better program is, Indiana was the team that executed better. And it's like if you're going to play a game with Indiana of who can execute better and who can convert opportunities better, it's like Indiana is the team that does that because they just kept piling on. And again, this is something we saw last yeir as well, where the offense turned into defense, where just, it's like, oh, the minute Indiana gets the ball, it's like, that's going to be a touchdown. So now it kind of like it automatically changes whatever offensive plans you have, because it's like, we have to do something. Although Michigan State made some odd calls, like in the third quarter, when they're like a 50-yard field goal. And it's like, what, guys, you need points. Like a field goal is probably not, A, your guy's not going to make it, but B, it's like that is where sometimes the conventional football mind gets caught up for coaches, where it's like, no, when you're playing Indiana, you probably need to score touchdowns every time when your defense is not able to, stop them at all.
Yeah, it's just nice, to see Indiana create opportunities for themselves eventually in one vein and then immediately in another. And against Oregon, it was the defense that kept this team in the game and did what it needed to do until the offense was able to string together enough drives at the end to give them the margin that they needed. In this game, it was kind of the opposite. It was really a matter of, can you get the offense on the field and can you let them cook? Because Michigan State was not prepared defensively or capable really defensively of dealing with what Fernando Mendoza provided. And that's the other big storyline I wanted to talk about before we get to the drives is...
Oh, real quick, Oregon, by the way, they're good again. Just so you know, like they're good. They helped us out.
Yeah, Oregon actually leapt ahead of Indiana slightly in FPI because they beat Rutgers by a pretty insane margin. I think Oregon got angry. I think we might have gotten them angry, which good for Oregon. I think they maybe needed that boost, and they look like they're great value for the playoffs.
Sorry, Rutgers. Yeah, we apologize to everyone in Piscataway.
But no, let's talk about Fernando Mendoza, or Heisman-doza, as the crowd was chanting last night. 24 of 28, 332 yards, 4 touchdowns. It really should have been 25 of 28 for 5 touchdowns if the heel-toe rule was not so stupid in college football. But man, the man is putting on a clinic out there in terms of where he's throwing the ball, the touch he's putting on the ball, the way that he's reading the field, the way he's able to scramble at random intervals and avoid sacks, avoid pressure. I have seen a lot of quarterback play in my life, Scott, with Indiana. This is one of the best seasons I've already seen from an Indiana quarterback. And it's because of how much better he's getting every week at figuring out what the offense needs to do on any given play. And when he's given some time, as he was given in this game, and he's able to dip into his bag in terms of when he's handing the ball off to the running backs, but knowing that he's got essentially 4 guys that he can absolutely trust when he's throwing them the ball between Cooper, Surratt, E.J. Williams, and Riley Nowakowski. Man, he is just picking his spots in such an expert way. I don't know that I expected him to be this good this quickly, but he has gotten this good this quickly. And the sky is kind of the limit for this Indiana passing attack right now, which has a direct impact on their ability to run the ball as well.
What I love, and I've been hearing more about this as I've dug into even more national podcasts about college football, one of the things that's interesting about Mendoza is in the offseason, you know, a lot of the top quarterbacks in college go to the Manning Passing Academy down in Alabama or whatever. And I started hearing this the last couple of weeks that Mendoza didn't go. Like, he was invited, and Cignetti was like, "No, you're going to stay here. I want you to stay here and really learn the ins and outs of our offense." And you see the fruit that it's bearing right now, because he definitely understands when to pull, when to throw. Like, it's like you see it now all clicking, where quite at the beginning of the year, it's like, okay, understand when I pull it, here are my 3 reads, because it looks like he just knows, like, all right, I know Surratt's going to be open, or I know Cooper's going to be here, like, I know Nowakowski is my dump off. It's like he's definitely playing the game. But I'm really, it's cool to see that. And it's also cool, again, you know, you have a coach in Cignetti who, you know, understands, like, no, I need you here. And to have the confidence to be like, no, don't go to Manning Academy. And like, that's, you know, sounds cool. And like, it's always cool to be like, oh, you know, our quarterback's the Manning Academy. It's like, that's nothing bad. But like, you know, Cignetti understood, you got to be here and learn the system. And it does feel like some of those early games where you're like, man, it's like he's starting to figure this out. Like, now it definitely feels like he has complete control of the offense. And what's also really cool, and please stop me from saying this because I'm nervous about saying this, it felt like in a different way we started seeing this a little bit last year with Curtis Rourke, and then he hit his hand in the Nebraska game, and then it kind of never quite got the same. It feels like we're kind of hitting singularity now that we hit last year, but it's like, you know, Mendoza's got to keep his hands away from helmets for the rest of the season.
Yeah. You know, why'd you have to bring that up, Scott? I guess would be what I would say about that.
I know. It's
feels like tempting fate. But no, I mean, Omar Cooper Jr. yesterday in the post game.
I blame, it's like, it's so on me. It's so on me.
If we stop talking about it, maybe it'll go away. So we'll find out. Yeah, no, I'm kidding. But no, Omar Cooper Jr. said, you know, he knew Fernando wouldn't like hearing this, but he thinks he's the best quarterback in the country right now. And so much of it goes back to preparation. And like, there was a story that Zach Osterman wrote, I think, in the Indy Star, about how late Mendoza is staying to try to make sure that he's got his film study in, that he knows what's going on with this offense. I mean, Elijah Surratt leads the country with 9 touchdown catches, and Omar Cooper is tied for 5th in the country with 7 touchdown catches this season.
And what's funny is, for all the crap about like our non-conference, it's not like Surratt loaded up in those games. I think in the first game we were like, why is they not throwing to Surratt? It's like Surratt didn't get 8 of those catches against Kennesaw State and Indiana State.
Yeah, it's been interesting watching what they've done over the course of the year in terms of racking up touchdown throws. And you know, what's nice is this is always there, and opposing defenses are often just choosing at this point, well, are we going to go heavy on the run, or are we going to try to concentrate on the pass? Those that can concentrate on the pass. You know, Oregon was able, because of the superior athleticism of their defensive players. You know, think about the way that Mendoza attacked that. It was all out-breaking routes. It was meant to avoid, you know, defenders, you know, pinching down. There was not a ton of over-the-middle stuff. And he did a great job of making the decisions in the RPO scheme. In this game, Michigan State didn't have the talent. He was able to go over the middle. Like, the number of throws think about the number of throws that were over the middle that were to wide open guys. And I'm not just talking about the over the top one to Cooper at the beginning of the second half. I'm also talking about the throw to Cooper earlier on in the second quarter, where he just does this long crossing route across the field. There was a post corner route that was, again, it was outbreaking, but it was outbreaking at the last possible second. There was another play, I think it was the first quarter, might have been the second, where he's pressured, he rolls out to his opposite side, squares his body, drops it over to Nowakowski, and Nowakowski runs for like 30 yards. I mean,
I remember that.
There's just all of these little plays that require you to know mentally where all of your receivers are, and then to be able on the fly to have the physical touch to be able to get the ball where it needs to. When he's given time, you get those miracle superstar throws like that Surratt touchdown that they threw in the third quarter, or you get the opportunity like the Nowakowski one to watch the improvisation. And when you mix in the mobility that he is able to bring, it just gives an extra dimension. You mentioned Indiana struggling against mobile quarterbacks. I mean, it's one of those things where everybody struggles against mobile quarterbacks, right? Because if you've schemed to recognize whether it's a pass or a run, commit to the pass when it's not a run, and then have to deal with somebody running, that's hard regardless. But then it becomes the skill of the quarterback not just scrambling all the time. And it's actually where I thought Aiden Childs had done a good job of maturing from last year. But you see the delta between where he's at and where Mendoza's at in terms of how they're processing the game. And that is really exciting. And I don't know if Mendoza is going to win the Heisman, but he's going to have an opportunity against a lot of the defenses that are upcoming to put a lot of numbers up. And I mean, whether it's UCLA or Maryland, Penn State, I think is going to be a challenge. We saw defensively, they're still up and running pretty heavily, even though they lost that game to Iowa. I thought that Penn State played pretty well overall in that game. But Wisconsin, Purdue, I mean, these are teams that don't have really strong defenses against the pass, and Indiana's going to be able to lean on that going down the stretch, and that's really exciting given who's under center.
And he theoretically has one more year. I mean, theoretically, he could stay one more year if he wanted. What I think is crazy, like embarrassment of riches, and everything you said is true, and we should have started with Mendoza and did all the talk we just did. This isn't a game. How many of these post games have we done, Galen? Like hundreds. We rushed for 140 yards to average 4.7 yards a carry. We had two running backs average over 6.5 yards, 6.4, 6.7 yards a carry. Both of them had, 25 plus long runs, one for, Kalen Black goes, 64 yards, one touchdown. It's like their numbers weren't better just because we didn't give them the ball that much, but like, what an embarrassment of riches. I mean, normally if we had those running numbers, that's all we'd be talking about. But the fact that that's how good Mendoza is, that we also have this running attack that's killing it and doing really well. I mean, and the two things are in tandem. Again, this is a team that works in tandem with each other and it knows how to work, but it boggles my mind that like 5 years ago, if I would have said, we had those rushing numbers and that's going to be like the third lead in our post game, it's wild, but it is. But I mean, like the running backs were also phenomenal.
Yeah, no, they were. And again, it's one of those where, Hemby had a great game against Oregon. Kalen Black with the big play in this game,
right.
An explosive play. Indiana had a bunch of explosive plays in this game. We've been asking for them. They finally showed up. But the fact, again, and even Kobe Martin, I thought, came in and showed some burst there. And it's great that you've got that third running back. That was supposed to be Lee Beebe Jr., and it's still very disappointing that he's out for the season with an injury. But the fact that they're able to bring that rotation in and get some downs off down the stretch in what's going to be a season where your depth is already challenged a little bit. That's really exciting to see. You know what, Scott? I think it's time for Recite the Drives.
Let's go. This is fun.
All right. Recite the Drives, brought to you by Jeremy Barbuto of Iron Horn Enterprises. They buy commercial real estate. Give Jeremy an email at jeremy@ironhornenterprises.com. We'll go ahead and dive in to the Recite the Drives for this week. And let's start off by kind of just going through the first half. 13 plays, 55 yards for Michigan State coming right out of the opening kickoff. It results in a field goal, choose 7 minutes off the clock. Indiana responds with an 11-play, 75-yard touchdown. And that was the only drives that existed in the first quarter. It felt even at that point, Scott, like Michigan State was going to be able to grind things down a little bit, but Indiana was going to be able to potentially score at will, provided they could maintain momentum in the game. And that's really how it set up for the second quarter as well. Let's go ahead and dive into the second quarter, though.
By the way, how many times do we do this? You have two drives in the first quarter. Just an unbelievable amount of clock killage there.
Yes, and Michigan State with probably one of the longest sustained drives we will see against this Indiana defense to start off that second quarter. 12 plays, 75 yards, 8 minutes and 18 seconds, and it results in a touchdown for the Spartans. It was disappointing because there felt like a couple of circumstances on that drive where Indiana could have stopped it. They had them backed up on a penalty that happened about halfway through. Michigan State was able to get out of it. And again, I mean, there was some restlessness in my seating section about that, but I looked at it and said, well, okay, fine. Michigan State's clearly doing something that Indiana was not prepared for, and that does happen defensively, but you've got plenty of time to adjust. And it's going to really be a factor of, can Indiana continue to score until their defense gets it figured out? Well, Indiana's next drive, it's, again, clinical. 5 plays, 75 yards, and it ends up with that pass to Elijah Surratt in the corner of the end zone this was not the corner of the end zone touchdown. This was, again, one of those across the middle touchdowns where he dumps it to Surratt. Surratt with some great open field moves. I mean, that was electrifying in the stadium watching that happen. And he takes it in for the score. And just like that, it's 14-10 Indiana. And at that point, if you're Michigan State, you're like, we're going to have to score every single possession moving forward. And
right.
guess
Well,
what?
no,
Yeah.
And they did. They did. Well, and that's something too. Like I often wonder in situations like this, this is the playing checkers versus playing chess, is if you're Signetti, your offense is going to have a pretty good chance at moving the ball against Michigan State. You wonder, are you trying some things out on defense, knowing that maybe later on in the season you're going to have a different team with a different mobile quarterback? Like, is he scouting something that he's seeing against Georgia or Ole Miss, where it's like, let's try some things out now in kind of a safe, nerfed environment, so to speak, basically knowing that we're going to score a touchdown every time. It's like, because once the offense got out, like, it definitely felt like on defense they were trying some things out, and because on offense it's like, just we knew we were going to basically have a really good chance at scoring every single time.
Yeah, and Michigan State just couldn't keep up. Their next drive in the second quarter, 6 plays, 35 yards. They move the ball some, but they have to punt. And then Indiana drives right down the field and scores with under a minute to play, 8 plays, 80 yards for the touchdown. And, of course, it's finished off by Kalon Black with that 29-yard explosive run for the score, 21-10. And then Michigan State finally gets sacked at the end of the first half, 6 plays, 13 yards. That finishes it out. It's 21-10 at that point, Scott. And then this was a concern for me. We had to pause the game because of storms, lightning, rain, everything. So an extended pause at halftime. You always worry, how's your team going to react in those sorts of situations? Well, Indiana showed that there was no problem. I didn't even get back in my seat. I'm so angry. Like, there was no, well, if you've ever been to Memorial Stadium, and this, I'm not blaming anybody, it was just annoying. There's no real way of telling when you're allowed to go back in the stadium. There was no announcement on any sort of speakers, because there aren't any speakers at there, I don't think. So I heard the roar as I was walking up the tunnel for the Cooper touchdown pass, but I wasn't able to see it in person. I've gone back and watched it 50 times in penance on replay. But again, right out of half, pass to Surratt, Mendoza run, and then a pass interference penalty. And then Indiana, a couple of plays later, from midfield, Omar Cooper Jr. right over the middle, just a classic post pattern, 48 yards for the score. And at that point, you're like, well, is the route on or what's going on here? But Indiana was clearly in control at that point.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think they were in control, and they did. I feel like they could have probably laid it on thicker had they wanted to, but it's like, you're in control, just take control of this game. But when you look at it just from the Indiana perspective, I mean, I love doing the drives just on Indiana alone. It's touchdown, 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 give it up on downs, field goal, end of game. Like, that is just clinical on Indiana's side. Just all touchdowns until basically the game is over.
Michigan State did drive down, try to kick a field goal. They missed it. Indiana comes back with another touchdown ending drive. That was that highlight pass and catch from Fernando Mendoza to Elijah Surratt on his back shoulder in the end zone. Just a tremendous on a rope kind of throw. And then Michigan State punts to end the third quarter. And at that point, the game kind of ground to a halt. Again, as you said, Indiana kind of playing safe in terms of what they wanted to do. They did go for it on fourth down, deep in Michigan State territory. They ended up not converting. Michigan State lost it on a fourth down conversion that didn't happen. Indiana looked like they were going to maybe run out on downs, and then Jonathan Smith started to call timeouts, which I think got Curt Cignetti upset, so he kicked a field goal. And then Michigan State, against the backups, drives down the field, kicks a meaningless to everybody but gamblers field goal at the end of the game, and then Indiana kneels to end it. And that's the drives, again, brought to you by Jeremy Barbuto and Ironhorn Enterprises. Jeremy Barbuto purchases commercial real estate. Contact him, Jeremy at ironhornenterprises.com or 315-436-3872. Jeremy, as always, we appreciate the patronage, and it's been a lot of fun having that as a sponsored segment here. We're looking forward to continuing to do that throughout the course of the season and hopefully beyond. So, Scott, as we look around at the rest of the game and the statistics from the various players on this team, first of all, a couple of things I wanted to note. A pretty mistake-free game from Indiana, only one penalty for 5 yards in this game. that counted against Indiana. Michigan State 6 for 46, and a lot of those penalties were at key moments in the first half when they lost momentum.
No, that's good to hear. After, like we said, the win at Oregon was awesome. We'll never forget. We had a lot of penalties in that game. I think it was like 8 penalties for 75 yards. So it's obviously something that was drilled into this team of like, hey, we're not doing that again.
Yeah. Indiana with just a very efficient approach offensively in this game. 11.9 yards per pass to 7.7 for Michigan State. 4.7 yards per rush for Indiana in this game. Michigan State only was able to rush for 3.1. And the time of possession, which was so lopsided for so long because of how long Michigan State was trying to stay on the field, ended up almost even. Michigan State with a slight advantage in time of possession. But overall, it ended up being, 31-28 in terms of minutes. Indiana also 5 for 8 on third down and 1 for 2 on fourth down. Michigan State 5 for 14 on third down. They did convert 3 out of their 4 fourth down attempts, but Indiana outgains Michigan State by 97 yards in this one and just looked like the better team in every aspect, as one would expect, given how these two teams have played so far this season. So,
well, in the end, like we talked about a little bit from our episode at Posh earlier in this week, we were kind of discussing, how much, the look of this win is going to matter, and it's like in the end, a meaningless touchdown is what stopped us from covering that spread. But it was like, we talked about it being a huge spread, maybe the biggest in this series, and basically Indiana covered. I mean, in the end, it's like we went out and we covered a big spread. We didn't because of a meaningless field goal at the end, but it's not like this was really a game that was in doubt anytime in the second half. And if you just looked at the score, it's like, oh man, Indiana pretty much dominated Michigan State. So, I mean, I think they did everything that they needed to do, and what you'd expect a really good team to do against a subpar team in the conference.
Yeah. So it's going to be a fascinating thing to watch Indiana continue to evolve this season. We've seen them win with offense. We've seen them win with defense. We've seen them have special teams lead the way. This is the type of team that can be very dangerous moving forward. As we saw in this one, they're going to need to be prepared because you're going to get everybody's shot. As bad as Michigan State looked at home last week against UCLA, they started off looking much better in this game. And the scores, I believe, were identical. But again, Michigan State wanted to elevate their game to play against Indiana. And I really give IU a ton of credit for being able to take that punch early, make adjustments, and never really feel like they were in any danger in this one. And that's the energy that this team's going to need to have. This felt like the game where you had the biggest worry about a mental letdown. At this stage, I think we need to trust this team more than we have, at least you and me. I'm not talking about the fans. Maybe the fans trust them already. But you and me, this is part of that, like a resetting process. And
I'll jump in there. Like I really do think I completely agree with you. And that's what I was thinking is it's like I think this team has now given the benefit of the doubt that I think for the rest of the year we don't need to be worried about are they going to be able to be mentally prepared? Because you think about last year under this coaching staff, it's like that Nebraska game was huge. You had big noon Saturday there. They win the game by a blowout. And it's like, oof, maybe they're getting all the flowers. Game day's coming. It's like you're playing Washington. You have a backup quarterback. It's like, nope, not a problem. And then it's like everything's happening. And then, the big Michigan is like this huge game. And like they are prepared. It's a tough game because Michigan's not a bad team, but they're prepared and they take care of it. It's like the Ohio State game. Like they're getting ready for that game. Are they going to be ready? It's like they started off really well in that game. Even the Notre Dame game. It's like, is the college football playoff? Are they going to let down? It's like, no, they're ready for all of this. And then this year, same thing. It's like, after the Illinois win, are you ready to now go take a rough road test? They complete that. It's like, oof, are you ready for Oregon? You cut like, I think they've passed every hurdle. And so as we continue this road, it's like, are they ready to, close out undefeated? Probably. Are they ready to go win the Big Ten title? Yes. Like, are they ready for a college football playoff game? Like, yes. Like, I think we are past all of those things.
Yeah. I mean, it really does come down to keeping things going. And again, going back to that comment I made earlier about a professional team, a team that is wired to be mentally ready to sustain in these. Like Ohio State at Wisconsin yesterday was a great example of this. Like that's an Ohio State team that's not really been challenged. They've won much tougher road games, but they just go in and give a workmanlike for Ohio State performance where they just dominate a team that is clearly not playing to the same level that they are. And that's what Indiana's task is at this point moving forward. And
Yep.
there are some potential stumbling blocks, including UCLA, who won again last night as they beat Maryland at home. And that's a game now. It's a big noon kickoff game. Indiana going to be hosting UCLA at noon on Saturday next week. And the Fox crew is going to be here for that. And it's going to be fun watching this whole thing come together as we move down the course of the season. Scott?
And with Miami losing, we're now probably going to be should be number 2 in the country with probably half the first place votes. More first place votes. I would assume us and Ohio State would be splitting those votes.
Yeah, you would think. And that I think Ohio State will still be the number 1 team in the country.
But Georgia did. I got to talk to Feinbaum. Georgia did win a big game. So they should probably vault everybody, you think?
And look, ultimately the statistics are the things that are going to help to measure out the little differences between these teams. But even Heather Dinich in her playoff estimation said, I think multiple times, like Indiana has the best win in the country at Oregon. That is not likely to be unseated anytime soon as the best win in the country, unless somebody does something insane like win at Ohio.
I mean, that's close to a national championship. We could put a banner up, like finally got Heather Dinich to respect a Big Ten victory or a Big Ten team.
It's going to be fascinating watching it moving forward. Well, Scott, I know you had a time limit. Are you good? Or you need to jump
we are going to go get breakfast, so I think I'm going to bug out. I'll let you do FPI stuff. I appreciate it, but I will be back next week. We'll still be doing Crimson Cash this week with James. James and me maybe on the beach, not together, but it'll be wild. No, I appreciate it. Thank you, guys. It's been awesome.
Scott Caulfield joining us from a secret location as he prices out timeshares for the new Crimson Cast ventures. Scott, thanks so much. Go Hoosiers. We'll talk to you soon. We'll be right back right after this.
When the final buzzer sounds in Bloomington, the conversation starts here. The assembly call is IU basketball. Live post-game shows, smart midweek breakdowns, and no empty hot takes. Jared Morris, Coach Brian Tonsoni, Andy Bottoms, and Ryan Phillips dissect lineups, sets, and recruiting so you know what really happened and what it means for the Big Ten season, March, and beyond. Join the live chat on YouTube, then catch the podcast on Spotify and Apple. Just search Assembly Call and be part of Hoosier Nation's most trusted post-game tradition. If you're not listening to Sideline Stories with Trisha Whitaker and Sydney Parrish, you're missing great stories like this.
When you interviewed Signetti, did you know that he was the type of character that he is and so outspoken and just like what we call a soundbite machine?
No, not really, but I did realize in the first phone conversation how he was just so authentic. Literally at the end of the conversation, I'll never forget it. And I thought about Coach Knight a little bit because I'd heard that people asked Coach Knight when he took the Indiana job and they'd say, "Why did you go to Indiana?" And he said, "Because I could win there." So I'm on the phone with Coach Sig, and at the end, I said, "Do you think you could win here?" And he said, "Scott, let me just tell you this. If I have average resources, I will win. Trust me." I remember thinking, I believe it. I really did. And I remember hanging up, and I called President Whitten. I said, "Hey, I just finished up with Coach Signetti," and I said, "Hey, I think he's different."
Sideline Stories is part of the Back Home Network. Subscribe on YouTube and Spotify.
Welcome back to Crimson Cast. Thanks to Scott, who took time out of his time away to chat this morning about IU and Michigan State. Let's go ahead and dive in a little bit to some of the advanced stats and numbers that we're seeing as of this morning. Folks, we're getting closer and closer to the college football playoff initial rankings. I believe the first show is going to be about 2.5 weeks from now. And, I think most of us remember being around last year when this process was first starting. This was brand new territory for Indiana fans. And how do you deal with it? We remember the weekly rankings and things like that. We remember where Indiana was sitting in a lot of those. This year's a completely different story in that last year it was a question of, well, how will the committee view Indiana? How will they view what they've done in terms of their strength of record? Will they penalize them for the teams that they're playing not having been as successful as others? This year, again, Indiana's got the best win of the season in college football, the game at Oregon. They've got a huge win over the Illinois Fighting Illini, a significantly larger win than Ohio State got. Yes, there was a road home difference there, but again, when you look at that from a comparison perspective, that's things that go in Indiana's favor. So you've got to start to look at some of the other distinguishing features of things this year to try to figure out, all right, how will the committee decide they're going to place these teams in terms of pecking order? And there's a lot of different elements that go into that, obviously. One of them is Indiana hasn't lost. Ohio State hasn't lost. Texas A&M has not lost. And then you've got this group of teams below that have one loss, plus you've got the oddball of Notre Dame, who's lost twice, but has played at a pretty high statistical level. So it's going to be fascinating, especially with a lot of the different things that are going on with the teams that are in contention for the playoff. And what's different this year is that the rankings really will matter, because the rankings will translate in most cases directly to seeding. There's some exceptions there simply because it seemed like the committee last year tried to keep conference opponents from playing each other in the first round. And I think that might also happen here a little bit, where they may not want a rematch of an SEC game or a rematch of a Big Ten game in the first round of the playoff. So I think we might see a little bit of moving teams around just slightly based upon that. But in terms of the rankings themselves, what has Indiana got going for it right now? Well, we got the most recent FPI, which of course is ESPN's primary statistical categorization of college football. And let me just show you what that looks like here for those who are watching along. Indiana actually slid 2 spots in FPI this week, as previously they were second, and now they've dropped to 4th. Now, why did that happen? Well, you got to keep in mind that what the computers look at is how good do we think you are? How good do we think your opponent is? Did you beat that opponent by a significantly higher margin? Did you play efficiently in other areas? And look, Indiana did everything that you would ask them to do in this game. They didn't cover against Michigan State. And normally we look at that from a gambling perspective, but really the way you need to look at it is the concept of the cover also applies to the way that statistical analysis works, where it's like, yes, you beat Michigan State, but if we expected you to beat Michigan State by 27 and you only beat them by 25, Oregon, we expected to beat Rutgers by 20 and they win by like 44. Well, that's going to look a lot better computer-wise for Oregon than it will for Indiana. So that's essentially what we saw in this this most recent update of the FPI rankings. In terms of the overall FPI, Ohio State number 1, Oregon number 2, Alabama number 3, Indiana number 4, dropping 2 spots, and then Notre Dame very close to Indiana in terms of what FPI looks at. They drop a spot to number 5. Then you've got Georgia in 6th, Texas, who did not look good again, as they had to go to overtime to beat Kentucky, in 7th. USC loses to Notre Dame, plays one of the dumbest halves of football I think I've ever seen from a team that's supposed to be in the top 20. But they go up a spot because they scored some points. And then Miami drops a spot after their loss, and Texas A&M, despite being 7-0, only at 10th, right above Ole Miss. And then Texas Tech loses yesterday as well. They drop to 12th. If you look at efficiencies, and this is where it's tough to try to parse out sometimes the FPI ranking from the efficiencies themselves. The efficiencies are, how efficient are you offensively? How efficient are you defensively? How well are you playing in special teams? And then you blend all those together, and that's your overall rating. It's important to note that FPI, much like S&P Plus, also factors in old data. The data from the previous season still filters in to some degree, with the idea that by around week 10, it's all filtered out, and what you're seeing in the FPI is a full representation of what has actually been going on this season without bringing in materials from last season. So looking at efficiencies overall, Ohio State is first. They're 6th in the country in offense. They have, according to the numbers, the best defense, or at least the most efficient defense in the country. Their special teams has been poor, but it hasn't really mattered. Indiana, 2nd in the country, 7th best offense, 4th best defense, 12th best special teams. Oregon, 3rd, and again, it's one of those where their offense is slightly better than Indiana's on the course of the season, not against Indiana directly, obviously. Oregon's defense is 3rd, and their special teams is really bad. And then you look at a team like Texas Tech, 4th in the efficiency ratings, 30th in offense, but 2nd in defense and 30th in special teams. And that I think when you look at all of this, this is what we need to keep an eye on. It's really going to be, I think, to some degree, a mix of, all right, how good are your efficiencies in these different areas, and how well are you playing this season? But then, have you taken care of business in the games that you're supposed to be taking care of business in? Looking at Indiana's resume overall, their strength of record, which again, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, strength of record is a rating of how difficult it would be for the average top 25 team to have done against the schedule that this team has played, what that team has done. Texas A&M is first in strength of record, Indiana's second, Ohio State's third, Alabama's fourth, and BYU, somewhat surprisingly, is fifth. If you look at strength of schedule, for all the talk about strength of schedule, Indiana is 30th in the country in strength of schedule, Ohio State's 33rd, BYU's 61st, Georgia Tech 72nd. I mean, Indiana's right in the mix. Like, there's the strength of schedule argument was always a dumb one, and this is an illustration as to why. Game control, Indiana's second in the country in the control they've exerted over games. Only Ohio State is better. And when you look at all of that in collective, what you see is an Indiana team that is not a mirage. This is a team that is statistically as good as anybody in the country. And the further you get into the season, the harder it is for anybody on the committee to say, well, that's a product of just their schedule. Because again, they have played really well against the best teams that they've played, and they've played really well against the teams that aren't as good that they're expected to dominate. And, you know, if there was one slight disappointment yesterday, it's that Indiana couldn't get one more touchdown on the board. But the flip side of it is that was the game Michigan State was playing, and they deserve credit for it. They really made it difficult for Indiana to score on every possession, and they made Indiana have to make every possession count, and it did. Indiana will be expected to continue to win at that level. I just saw that the spread for the game against UCLA is 24 points right now, or 24 and a half. I've seen both numbers. And that's going to be a tall task for Indiana as they take on a UCLA team that is playing a ton better than they were playing before. Still not a team that looks very good in terms of their overall statistical profile, but that's because this is basically two separate teams. This is the UCLA team before Deshaun Foster got fired, and then it's the UCLA team that's played since Tim Skipper was put in charge, and they made all of those changes. And so that's going to be really interesting to watch as we move forward. How does Indiana react against a frisky team like that? How do they react in these road games where they're going to be expected to win statistically by a pretty wide margin? Can they maintain that pace as they move forward? Ultimately, maintaining that unbeaten record is going to be what matters the most for Indiana in terms of seeding. If Indiana can get to 12-0 and get into the Big Ten title game, I think win or lose in that game, they've locked themselves. Maybe lock is probably too strong of a word, but it feels unlikely that there's going to be a ton of teams, even with just one loss by the end of this season. A 2-loss or 1-loss cushion against SEC teams or against a team like Notre Dame really puts you in a great spot in terms of how the committee perceives you going into the playoff. And that is going to be so key for Indiana. If you're an Indiana fan, you want a scenario, obviously, where you're as highly seeded as possible. You want a scenario where you can get an extra week of rest. You want a scenario where you can play on a neutral field, because as we saw last year, Indiana did struggle in those huge environments like Ohio State and Notre Dame. And that's not something that's endemic to Indiana. That we've seen a lot of teams deal with those situations, not as well as they would like to. But getting Indiana onto a neutral field, getting Indiana into a position where they get an extra week of rest, especially since we know this team, they have amazing top line players. The depth is not going to be there quite the same way that a lot of the blue bloods depth will be there. And that, obviously talking about the Ohio States, the Alabamas, the Oregons, I'm assuming Georgia's going to be in the playoff. They don't look like they're going to collapse at this point. Notre Dame, I think, falls into this category as well. So for Indiana, it really does become imperative that they continue to play at this high level, that they, much as they did last year when they went to Michigan State or when they played Purdue at home, you've got to send a message to the committee, but you've also got to send a message to the computers. And, the message to the computers is simply, you need to be overwhelming from a statistical perspective, because that's what the computers respect. And I mean, obviously the computers are not sentient, So it's more like their algorithm looks at and says, that looks good according to the numbers that we're spitting out. But that's where we're at right now when it comes to Indiana. Looking at the FPI probabilities, currently Indiana with a 33.4% chance to win the conference. Ohio State at 54.4%. Oregon's at 8%. And I think USC's at 1.7%. It falls off pretty severely after that. Indiana right now with a 93.9% chance of making the playoff. That is second only to Ohio State. It's a better chance than Alabama, who's third at 90.2%. It's a better chance than Texas A&M, who's at 84.4%. And I think the only other teams that have a better than 50% chance of making the playoff right now are Georgia, who's at 81.7%, and Oregon, who's at 75.8%. Everybody else is at less than 50%. So again, Indiana has played well enough that they're in a real good spot right now. Indiana also wildly with the second highest percentage odds to make the national title game. Now, some of that is just a derivation of the percentages of making the playoff and then where you'd be projected in the seeding. But Indiana with a 28.1% chance of making the national championship game. Ohio State tops in the country at 42.3% right now. So that's where things sit as far as all of that's concerned. And when you look ahead at what Indiana's got remaining on their schedule, it is interesting just kind of going through and looking at the probabilities. Right now, Indiana, a 96.2% chance at beating UCLA. And again, that is going to be a game that Indiana's got at home. UCLA is going to be playing at 9 a.m. body clock time. That's a rough scenario for UCLA, but they've shown they can play very well lately. So it's going to be a challenge. And to some degree, it's like it's almost a good thing that UCLA is playing well because you want to have your team properly motivated if you're Indiana. I don't think anybody on Indiana's roster is going to take UCLA lightly. And I think that's a key thing. Indiana right now an 87.7% favorite, according to FPI, to win at Maryland. Indiana a 70.7% probability to win at Penn State, which is still wild to get your head wrapped around. And I'll say this again. I think Penn State showed that they're not giving up. They fought in that game against Iowa. They were in a position to win it. Iowa made the plays at the end of the game to win it. But I will just tell everybody, like, you're not just going to waltz into Happy Valley and win. That's a game to keep circled on the calendar. Indiana's going to have to play as good of a game as they played at Oregon to beat Penn State on the road. The game at home versus Wisconsin, Indiana, a 96% favorite in that one. And then the season ender in the regular season against Purdue, Indiana at 95.2% probability, according to FPI, to win that game. And, the Wisconsin and Purdue are going to be fascinating. Wisconsin's going to be senior day for IU. Wisconsin looked awful yesterday, and they are tied for last in the conference. It's a 5-way tie for last in the conference right now. It's Wisconsin, which is a surprise, frankly. Purdue, which is a bit of a surprise. Rutgers, which is a bit of a surprise. And then Penn State and Michigan State. All of those teams are 0-4 right now in the Big Ten. I don't think I would have predicted that coming into the season. Maryland, who Indiana also has on their schedule, now 1-3 in conference. It's again fascinating because Indiana has got a bunch of teams on their schedule the rest of the way here who have just not played very well in conference. And so can Indiana continue to pile the misery on for all of those teams? That's going to be the task that the Hoosiers have in front of them. Sometimes easier said than done. And this is also where, again, you're going to get every team's best shot. And each of those teams does something interesting that you need to focus on. So it'll be good tests for Indiana's defense, and it'll be good tests for Indiana continuing to maintain a level of efficiency on offense. There's just a lot of really interesting stuff going on the rest of the season. And again, something that we have not really been used to as people watching Indiana and trying to analyze what goes on with this football team. Last year, it felt like the plot line was, how long can Indiana keep this up? Because it felt like a finite resource, like the ability to win games while being highly ranked. Now I almost feel like for Indiana, the question is, can they maintain that high of a level, and can they do it consistently we've had some back and forth about whether, the hunter versus the hunted thing, if that really matters or not. And oftentimes I don't know that it does in terms of the motivation of the other team, but I think it's important to keep in mind, like, these are all Big Ten level teams. They can all play well on any given day, as we've seen from many of the results so far this season. For Indiana, the mental challenge becomes maintaining a high level of excellence in execution. And I think that was what was so positive for me in this Michigan State game, was even though Indiana didn't play an overwhelming game like Oregon did, we've seen from the beginning, like, Oregon is really like a fine-tuned race car. They are intended to go out and win by 40, 45, 50 points because they love to get out and do that kind of thing. Indiana was not built that way. Indiana was built with efficiency in mind. They were built with game control and ball control in mind, and they were built with the idea that they could rely on their defense not to give up a ton of points. That's the thing I think that's most fascinating, and it's easy to lose sight of how good the defensive performances have been because it's provided the baseline for the offense to try to get out there and do things above and beyond. In the last 5 games that Indiana's played against FBS opponents, so I'm going to take we'll just do the whole season, actually. Indiana's defense has allowed 14 points, 9 points, 0 points against Indiana State, which I'll put aside, 10 points against Illinois, 15 against Iowa, 20 against Oregon, but that is an asterisk because 7 of those points were on a pick 6, and then 13 points against Michigan State. That is a tremendous amount of defensive performance that we've seen out of Indiana. They have just been stymieing opponent offenses. And I think the question for Indiana now becomes, last year's offense almost at times felt more dominant. You think about the way that they played against Northwestern. You think of the way that they finished the game against Maryland. You think of the way that they played against Nebraska. You think of the way that they played in the last 3 quarters against Michigan State, against Purdue. They would go out and they would just bomb teams. This team is playing a bit differently offensively. This was the first game where I really felt like they hit the gas a bit offensively, since the Illinois game. Like the last couple of games against Iowa and Oregon, they were playing defenses that were specifically designed to take that stuff away. And they showed they could win those games. This is a game where Michigan State didn't have the horses to do so, and they were able to get some long throws, get some explosive plays. I think that bodes well for the future because they've shown they can win against either type of defensive approach. Offensively for Indiana, what's fascinating about this year, we talked about it a little bit when Scott was on, but I think it's worth repeating. This Indiana team has coalesced around a smaller, more reliable group of players from a performance perspective. And what I mean by that is you've got a top 5 wide receiver room, maybe better. It might be the best wide receiver room in the country. You think about Elijah Surratt and what he does. The Omar Cooper experience has reached an entirely new level where Omar Cooper is, for all of last year, it felt like Omar Cooper, like his job was to get deep. They didn't really use him a bunch underneath. That was really where other receivers came in, whether it was Miles Price or Keyshawn Williams. This year, they have unlocked a whole nother level of what Omar Cooper can do, and it makes it very hard for opposing defenses to just glue themselves to Elijah Surratt because they know Omar Cooper is going to kill them. EJ Williams, after getting injured early in the Oregon game and then coming back, but not really having a great statistical game, had a great game in this one. It really should have had 2 touchdowns. I feel bad for EJ, but I do really love the fact that EJ was able to get that touchdown earlier in the game. It was close, goal line call. He deserved a touchdown. It had been a rough time for EJ Williams in terms of production. After the Old Dominion game where he looked really good, he had 3 catches against Kennesaw, 2 against Indiana State, 3 against Illinois, 1 against Iowa, none against Oregon, but then comes back with his best statistical game of the season, 5 catches, 59 yards, and a score. And you look at the way that Indiana's rotated through their receivers over the course of the season. When somebody's getting covered, they've figured out a way to rotate to somebody else. This is Omar Cooper's second best game of the year in terms of yardage output, 8 catches, 115 yards. Remember, he went off against Indiana State. He had a really good game against Illinois. He had a a game against Iowa where he made the big catch that he needed to make. And then against Oregon, he was so key, but he wasn't really the scoring threat in that game. That was what they were using Surratt for. And then you look at Elijah Surratt and what he's been able to accomplish. 43 catches for Elijah Surratt so far on the season for 9 touchdowns. Omar Cooper, 37 catches for 581 yards and 7 touchdowns. And what I'll note is that last year, for the course of the entire 13 games of the season, Surratt had 53 catches. He's already at 43 this year. Last year, for the entirety of the 13-game season, Omar Cooper Jr. had 28 catches. This year, he's got 37. So you're really seeing, and again, if you go back and look at last year, there were a ton of players who had catches that were in that, 20 and above range. Miles Cross had 27, Zach Horton had 21, Keyshawn Williams had 39, Miles Price had 38. They've really consolidated the targets around their best players in the receiving game. And that, I think, bodes really well because that means you've got playmakers, like legitimate playmakers. And I think Riley Nowakowski, they're not using the tight ends nearly as much in the passing game, but they are using Riley Nowakowski as the safety valve, the safety blanket, whatever you want to call him. And sometimes even not. Sometimes they're doing design plays for Nowakowski. We saw a couple of those against Oregon. That's been exciting to see. And the rushing attack's been very back and forth. It's interesting because I think most people, if you ask them who's the leading rusher this year for Indiana, they'd say, oh, it's Roman Hemby. It's actually not. It's Kalon Black, who has rushed 72 times for 439 yards, a 6.1 yards per carry average. He's got 3 touchdowns on the season. Roman Hemby, 90 carries, 432 yards, a still very respectable 4.8 yards per carry average. And then Kobe Martin, who didn't look like he was going to play consistently this season, and actually hadn't played that much prior to this game, since coming in earlier in the year, 31 carries, 262 yards. He's at 8.45 yards per carry and has really shown some intriguing burst in his game. So I love the fact that Indiana, while they've got multiple players that can do things, has also consolidated the players that they're asking to do the most things. And they have a quarterback who's making the right decisions about whose hands to get the ball into at the right times. So defensively, you go back and look at what happened in this Michigan State game. And what I was most excited by was, again, Lewis Moore had an excellent game. And Lewis Moore actually made a list of like the top 20 players or top 30 players in college football. I can't remember whose list it was. It might have been Bill Connolly, but Moore has been great. And it's amazing to think that there was a moment where people were worried that Lewis Moore was not going to be a part of this defense. Having him on this team just adds another dimension to what the secondary can do. He led the team in tackles against Michigan State, had 6 solo tackles, had a half of a tackle for loss. Indiana racks up 4 sacks in this game, and you consider all 4 sacks essentially came in the second half with the one exception of the play that ended the first half. But Elijah Hardy, 2 sacks, Stephen Dailey with 2 sacks. Another game where Indiana had a ton of tackles for loss, 9 on the game. Elijah Hardy with 2.5 tackles for loss in this contest. And, they hold Michigan State's receivers to, 9.8 yards average per catch. They hold Michigan State running the ball to 3.1 yards per rush. Really good statistical performance by the Indiana defense overall. Anyway, that's going to wrap it up for this show. As Indiana, workmanlike, 7-0, 4-0 in the conference, and they come back this next week and they take on the UCLA Bruins. Again, that's going to be a noon kick from Memorial Stadium. Big Noon Kickoff's going to be here. Always great to have the Fox folks back in town, and should be another nice week of Indiana getting better, facing another opponent that's dangerous but inferior, statistically speaking. We'll see if Indiana can continue to maintain the high level of execution they've had throughout the course of this season. Big week coming up this week on the Back Home Network, as we will have the big red carpet coming up on Monday. Rhett Lewis coming back with his analysis of what happened in this game. And obviously, Rhett brings a unique insight across all of IU football media. We're very lucky to have him on the network, and we'll always look forward to hearing what he has to say. You'll also have, of course, Crimson Cash coming up later on in the week. You'll have, I believe, a new episode of Sideline Stories dropping. And then, of course, later on in the week, we'll have our preview of Indiana UCLA. We'll have more info on that coming up earlier on in the week rather than later. So keep an eye on the X feed. Keep an eye on Instagram and YouTube as well, as we'll be announcing some stuff there. So anyway, for Scott Caulfield, I'm Galen Clavio. As always, folks, thanks for joining us on Crimson Cast. And for everybody that I saw at the game, great to see you folks. We always appreciate you listening in or watching. You folks are the reason why the show works. We really love being along for the ride with you this Indiana football season. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. Stay never daunted. So long, everybody.